So we all love the Black Hills. You know, I grew up coming out here as a little kid and on vacation when I grew up by Sioux Falls, and I just fell in love with this forest. It doesn't happen by accident that we have such an amazing forest. That is governed by the forest plan. If we want our economy to thrive, if we want our forests to thrive, we have to make sure that we have a good plan in place. Many people have a vested interest here in the Black Hills, in the National Forest, in the management of this National Forest. On this episode, we're going to feature some guys that have really put their heart and soul into this for their entire careers.
So each national forest is required by the National Forest Management Act to have a forest plan. It's something that routinely happens on a 10 to 15 year cycle, and these are a strategic plan about how the forest will be managed for the next 10 or 15 years.
You know, it really starts with what's the state of the forest right now and what's the condition that you want to see over time. There's a lot of things there's some legal aspects to it. It's like looking at things that there's responsibilities that are embedded in the plan for preserving wildlife habitat, for example, that you have to comply with other laws that people think that are very important in doing that. But really when you get down to the practical is, what do people want to see and how should the forest be used over time?
There are a lot of different demands being placed on the National Forest in terms of habitat and that sort of thing. And as a result of that, the forest is starting to take a look at some different types of management regimes that can be implemented here on the forest. And I think it's important that we take a look at that, a very serious look at that, before we try to implement it on the National Forest, because we don't want to try to force the forest into doing something that's going to be out of sync with the ecology of the area.
Well, I'm going to steal a phrase from Representative Kamak, who said we either need to have it well managed or well done. So that means we need to manage it well through all the multiple use, or we'll end up with catastrophic fires like other parts of the nation. That's what this is all about, is a healthy forest, whatever that looks like, to achieve that goal.
So we are now at another revision, and it's due because we've had quite a few changes in the Black Hills over the last 20 years. We've had a major mountain pine beetle infestation, we've had major fires, and use. I mean, we're looking at 42,000 OHV permittees now using our forest. Huge impact on the Black Hills. So all that stuff needs to be analyzed and figure out where the forest wants to go. And that's why it's so important to have not just the Forest Service figuring it out, but the public. I mean, literally, it's a public's forest. It's not the Forest Service forest. This is a public forest.
I moved to Rapid City in 1989 to take the position with the Black Hills Forest Resource Association. And I also worked with National Forest in Wyoming and Colorado. I would say forest planning was a major part of the workload through that entire period, as all the national forests needed, they have to have a forest plan. They were in various cycles of amendments and revisions to those plans, and so I worked with the local sawmills and timber purchasers, forest products companies, to coordinate and to input and be involved in all of those plans.
recreation, ATVs, wildlife, I mean, everything that you can think of that goes on the Black Hills National Forest is included in that plan. And so it's a fairly good sized document once they get done. And if it's in there or not in there, that really dictates what the federal government can do here over the lifespan of that plan.
Exactly. These are they're a complex plan. They do cover all the resources from timber and wildlife and grazing, watersheds and recreation. Those are all analyzed, and then there's direction in this plan for the entire forest on where different resources will be emphasized and the coordination between the resources, what the objectives are, what the desired conditions are, and then what the sideboards are on that management.
I was served here as forest supervisor from 2005 till I retired in 2016 after I had 39 years of service with the Forest Service. The Black Hills are iconic if you think about the tribes and how sacred the Black Hills are to the tribes and from all their history here. And it's, you know, very deep spiritually. And then you have just other people, you know, South Dakotans, Wyomings that have the forest. They know the Black Hills. They come here. That's maybe part of their family memories that are here, as well as people all over the country and even international visitors. So every one of those perspectives matter, and then that leads into the forest planning. So what do people want to see? But first off, they value the Black Hills for what it brings, what it means to them. It's not the same for everybody, but it means something special to them, and that's why I think they care and why they get involved.
National forests should be governed. It's kind of a long-standing rule under multiple use. So that means recreation, that means grazing, that means some timber, all of the above and more. And that's really important. And the Black Hills has really been really well managed for over 100 years in that multiple use concept. But this forest plan has a lot to do with how that management goes. But the Black Hills is a checkerboard. A lot of private land, some state land, some BLM. The lion's share of that is, though, the national forest. And that is managed under the direction of the forest plan. And we're under a revision of that forest plan right now. So tell folks what that forest plan is and how that dictates what can go on in the national forest.
I'm going to back up just a little bit. You're right about the large amount of inholdings. Probably the most per capita in the nation our inholdings are because of our mining history. We have thousands of patented mineral surveys that were 20 acres maximum unless it was a placer claim. So we have this real heavy scattered of private lands. And to the point with the forest plan revision, you know, it's very important that revision consider the uniqueness of our forest, which is the large amount of inholdings, the large amount of accessibility roads and trails, and the history of our forest being the first Forest Service timber sale, case number 1 was in our forest. So we've been the poster child a long time, and somewhere in the last 2 decades we've started faltering from that poster child standing.
In the assessments, the Forest Service, I can't remember exactly how many stakeholders they identified, but we went through their list of stakeholders and we just about doubled it, listing of other people they'd missed. One of them, they'd missed the South Dakota stock growers. They didn't have them as a stakeholder, and they're very much part of it. And so it was really important that again, the public was involved in helping the Forest Service identify the people that are what we consider stakeholders.
3,900 miles of private property that interfaces, or some other public land that interfaces with the Black Hills. So that's in a lot of people's backyards. So everything that goes on there has got a lot of people with eyes on it. And I think that has a lot to do with how people say, we care about what goes on the forest.
Can you just explain, to your knowledge at this point, what they're going to be focusing on as far as that plan is concerning?
One of the really big issues is going to be forest resiliency. And sort of the bottom line of forest resiliency is how do we keep forest as forest? And the threats, the two big threats in the Black Hills are catastrophic fires like the Jasper Fire or mountain pine beetle epidemics like we had for about 15 years in the early 2000s. And so that's going to be a major thrust of this plan revision is thinking through how our management actions can influence the potential for those and hopefully reduce the potential for those so that we don't have more catastrophic fires and we don't have the risk of a mountain pine beetle epidemic.
My background is a lot more in grazing, rangeland, things like that. And in that capacity, ponderosa pine trees are a weed. I mean, they can take over and they can really be a problem, as we can see right here. The Black Hills is full of ponderosa pine, which basically says it needs to be managed. Talk about that need for management within the Black Hills National Forest and what that really means.
Okay. The Black Hills is unique in ponderosa pine ecosystems in that we have such a proliferation of natural regeneration, which is these young trees here. The problem is we can get 3,000 to 5,000 seedlings per acre, and that is way too many trees. You end up with something like this where you can't even walk through it.
And neither can a deer or anything else.
Right,
This isn't
right.
good wildlife habitat. That's just
No.
a disaster waiting to happen.
No, that's right. Something has to thin those trees out. Since the Black Hills became settled, fire is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it does do some ecosystem restoration, but it's a bad thing because fires can get really big really fast and do a lot of damage that we don't want to see done, especially in the Black Hills that we have now where there are homes throughout the Black Hills.
Greg is talking about having a resilient forest system. It's important that a forest stays a forest, and that doesn't always happen. If we have catastrophic wildfires or other catastrophic ecological events, you can completely change the landscape and it can look very different. It can go from a forest to a grassland or from a grassland to a shrubland. And so we want to make sure that we have these Black Hills in perpetuity as a forest, as a productive forest, and that's what Greg's talking about right here.
We can manage the forest to reduce the risk of fires and mountain pine beetles. And so it's bringing that science and that knowledge into the forest plan so that the strategies are geared toward accomplishing that. I put it that we don't want the catastrophic fires. We know we're going to have forest fires. We know we're going to have mountain pine beetles. We just don't want an epidemic that's covering hundreds of thousands of acres. We're not going to avoid small fires and small insect outbreaks, but we don't want them to cross that threshold to catastrophic fire or an epidemic.
What we do is basically we thin these out so that the remaining trees have enough light, water, and nutrients to be able to grow into taller, larger trees. Because these trees are competing with each other for those resources right now, and they're never going to get very big. They're always going to stay small and spindly. You can find trees from high density areas in the Black Hills that are 80 years old and no more than 3 or 4 inches in diameter. Or you can find trees that have been released where that competition has been reduced, and they could be 14, 15 inches in diameter and 60 feet tall. So management of this is really important. And the other benefit to managing the tree density is that it increases the forage production underneath that canopy. And that's good for wildlife and it's good for livestock.
If we get these areas that are way too overseeded and overgrown, like Greg's talking about here, all of the forage basically disappears. That's not good for wildlife. It's not good for domestic cattle either. We hope that people understand that what's good for wildlife is usually also good for domestic livestock as well, and we want those things to work in conjunction with each other.
Without the stakeholders coming back and saying this stuff needs to be better, the Forest Service wouldn't have done better. So it's up to the public to really help the Forest Service put this plan together. This forest grows a lot of trees. Let's manage the Black Hills, not just part of it. Let's figure out what we need to do going forward, and do it as a community, you know.
And as we go to the next steps, there will be public involvement, and we need everyone involved. We need recreators, we need timber industry people, we need mining people, but most of all, we need people that live in the Black Hills National Forest.
You know, a lot of times people think they don't have a say in that, or it's just they're going to do whatever they want to do. The Black Hills is a very unique forest, right? If you've been across the West, the Black Hills is pretty special, and everybody that lives here knows that. At least I hope so. And so there are opportunities for the general public to give their input and to influence this plan so that we can continue to have this beautiful forest that we all enjoy.
Everybody that lives, works, and plays in the Black Hills has a stake in this forest plan. This emphasis on public involvement and participation, it just presents a real opportunity for the public to really be part of this planning process and to help shape and guide where it goes. So one of the things that the advisory committee worked with the Forest Service on was two publications. One is called A Citizen's Guide to National Forest Planning, okay, and the other is Understanding opportunities for state, local, and tribal governments to participate in the planning process. These are both very, very thoughtful publications that are available on the Forest Service's website, and these would be a tremendous resource for either citizens or stakeholders or for local governments.
Tom's talking about here is really getting citizens involved. This is your forest. This is a public forest. And so we encourage people to go to the website, go to the Black Hills National Forest website, look up these documents, find ways that you can get involved. Yes, this is a several-year-long project, but if you don't get involved early and often, it's going to be too late by the time the draft comes out. What are some opportunities people have to get involved? Because we're very early on in that process right now, and that's going to take a few years as well. So can you just dig into some of the details on how people can get involved and what that process looks like over the revision process?
Well, one of the things is the U.S. Forest Service will publish, different steps along in the planning process to say when things are like open for comment and what kind of assessments they found, and then there'll be some other things about a comment period, and I'll defer to the current Forest Service people to spell those out. But being involved is understanding when your voice is most effective. Tell why you matter. People might sign a form letter or do something like that and tie on to somebody else. But I would just tell you from my experience, it's always like why it matters to me. The Black Hills is unique and one of the few forests that has a National Forest Advisory Board. Okay, so there's 16 members of that board that represent different interests. From tribal, you have grazing and permittees, you have industry, you have regional and national environmental groups, tribal representatives, people from education. So there's a lot of different things there, and those people go and help advise the forest supervisor, the regional forester, even up to the Secretary of Agriculture, okay? So if you don't have the time in that, you have some representation. to go into that board there. You know, these are federal forest lands, and so the elected officials, the 2 U.S. senators and our representative for South Dakota, and the 2 U.S. senators in Wyoming and the representative from Wyoming, those are all also segues to give your voice heard. And so I think all that helps in the process. The symposium that's coming up on October 3rd is a good primer on broader case of the national planning rule. So stay engaged, would be my word there.
It's just beginning, and that's one reason why we're planning this as Dakota Society of American Foresters. We're planning this symposium is to get people engaged in the initial ends of what the Forest Service is putting out there for the public to see.
The Black Hills is an island of forest in the plains. So all you have to do is look at it from a satellite image and you see a finite area. And therefore it has finite resources. And it's really important that we take care of those resources for future generations. It's a homegrown feeling that we have, that when we come out here we feel at home. And it's a part of our growing up, and something that we'll take with us wherever we go.
I have never experienced the level of people being respectful on their listening and coming together to try to find a path forward. This is a unique area for that in northeastern Wyoming and western South Dakota. There's something special here about that. And I hope that people keep that. What you just said, you can check some at the door and come in and listen and learn from others and come over and say, hey, is there a path forward that's going to work for everybody the very best we can?